I'm Tim Bradner. Welcome to Capital Views. Representative Mike Hawker, Anchorage, is with us today. Mike, thanks for joining us. You have long been interested, I know, in the problem of the state's pension obligations and the concerns that people have about how we're going to meet those obligations. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about your perspective on this.
I appreciate that, Tim, and thank you. This is, believe it or not, my 12th year in the legislature. And the year that I was first elected, 2002, began serving in 2003, was the year that the actuarial evaluations for the pension plans had the precipitous drop in funding from essentially a fully funded plan to one that was significantly underfunded. And then, of course, that underfunding has continued to grow in subsequent years here.
What's the latest estimate?
With apologies, I can't pull a number off the top of my head, but haven't I seen numbers like 11 and 12 billion dollars? Allow me a little latitude there, but it's a significant number. I think what we have to keep in mind when we approach this unfunded liability is that it is at best an estimate. It's a number that's derived by an actuary taking an estimate of what costs will be for the next 28 years into the future and comparing that to what we think we are going to get on the earnings of the money we have invested over the same 28 years in the future. And frankly, if we can hit either one of those correctly, I'll invest my money with that guy. But in all seriousness, the largest driver of this has always been the out-year medical costs. The core pension obligations have basically been solvent over the years. Tier 3, Tier 2 were solvent. The issue had been the unfunded medical cost into the future. It's an area where we as a state not only need to look at, I think the most efficacious way of dealing with that out-year medical expense estimate is dealing with the root causes, and that's the increasing cost of medical care. It's really putting the Band-Aid, as I've always said, the Band-Aid on the bullet hole when we look at simply putting money into the system to pay for medical costs without really looking at the root causes, which is the growth in those medical costs. And I've also told many times I've had meetings with the retired public employees, folks who are very concerned about there being money available to fund the commitment the state has made to them as former public employees. And I maintain very strongly that, first, no retired public employee should ever fear, because by the Constitution, they are entitled to their benefits. And I firmly believe that if it came down to it, they'd have a first right on the permanent fund, some $50 billion in assets, nearly $50 billion in assets. But even more poignant is this number, this $11 billion liability that's calculated it's created with a forward-looking 28-year period in which to calculate both the estimate of costs and the estimate of what money's available. Realistically, the state of Alaska is going to be around for 100 years. We really have eternity to resolve this issue. So I don't want to belittle the issue on how important it is that we continue to be frugal, responsible, put money aside when we can, but this is not a number that we need to be panicked over the way I think we have somewhat in the past. With all those pieces, there's so many tools at our hands that we can work on this with. We have in the past, and we do, just like paying off a home mortgage, making extra payments every year. That's a good thing. I'm a little concerned we have not focused enough on that reducing out-year medical costs, and certainly sitting down with all of our public employee organized labor associations who are willing to sit at the table with us and talk about alternatives on the medical care, addressing the co-pays, addressing the level of coverages. And then another bill that I had introduced and passed successfully a number of years ago would have allowed us to issue what they call pension obligation bonds. And I think even your publication wasn't very friendly towards those. But I would sure have you someday do a calculus and see what would happen if we had issued a $5 billion pension bond when that opportunity came around by the statute, and that was at a time when the equity markets were at a very low ebb, and had we invested that over the past 8 years or so here, and watched the markets have recovered substantially, the amount of money that would have been there, as opposed to the interest that we would have paid on those very, very low interest cost bonds, we would have had a tremendous arbitrage gain. And that arbitrage gain would have made a significant difference in the liability as it faces us today. And I talked about that recently with some folks over at Department of Revenue who concur that it was a missed opportunity.
So, in other words, we have options, we have tools. We don't necessarily have to take a lot of money out of our reserve accounts. We have other tools available to us.
Well, I think the more money we are willing to take out of our reserve accounts today, the better off we will be in, I think, addressing the liability. But I just want to emphasize, I don't think that, first off, we need to panic and pull too much money out of our reserve accounts. And secondly, we need to look very carefully at how we take that money out and where we put it. There was a proposal a couple of years ago that rather than just putting the money into the retirement funds where it would be forever out of our reach, creating some sort of a retirement fund supplement trust that would allow us to tap the value of that trust, use the earnings off of it to supplement the money, the value that's in the retirement trust. But should we reach a point where we are fully funded again, that money would be able to revert back to the general treasury rather than having it forever locked up in the retirement trust.
Mike, we have options, in other words.
Many options.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. Tim Bradner with Capital Views with Representative Mike Hawker. Thanks for joining us.